Okay, chapters 9 and 10, Mr. Popper's Penguin, written by Richard and Florence Atwater. So chapter 9, the barber shop. If you remember, they went into the barber shop to escape the crowd. It was very quiet in the barber shop. The barber was shaving an elderly gentleman. Captain Cook found this spectacle very interesting, and in order to get a better view, he jumped up on the mirrored ledge. "Good night," said the barber. The gentleman in the barber chair, his face already white with lather, half lifted his head to see what had happened. "Cook," said the penguin, flapping his flippers and reaching out his long beak towards the lathered gentleman's face. With a yell and a leap, the gentleman rose from his reclining position, left the barber chair, and fled out into the street, not even stopping for his coat and hat. "Gawk," said the captain. "Hey," said the barber to Mr. Popper, "take that thing out of my shop. This is no zoo. What's the idea?" "Do you mind if I take him out your back door?" asked Mr. Popper. "Any door," said the barber, "as long as it's quick. Now, it's biting the teeth off of my combs." Mr. Popper took Captain Cook in his arms, and amid the cries of "Gork" and "Gawk" and "Awk," made his way out of the shop and into its back room, and out the door into the alley. Captain Cook now discovered his first back stairway. Mr. Popper discovered that when a penguin has found steps going up anywhere, it is absolutely important to keep him from climbing them. "All right," said Mr. Popper, panting up the steps behind Captain Cook. "I suppose, being a bird, and one that can't fly, you have to go up into the air somehow. So you like to climb stairs. Well, it's a good thing this building has only 3 stories. Come on, let's see what you can do." Slowly but unwaveringly, Captain Cook lifted one pink foot after another from one step to the next, following Mr. Popper at the other end of the clothesline. At last they came to the top landing. "Now what?" inquired Mr. Popper of Captain Cook. Finding there was no more steps to climb, Captain Cook turned around and surveyed the steps that now went down. Then he raised his flippers and leaned forward. Mr. Popper, who was still panting for breath, had not supposed the determined bird would plunge so quickly. He should have remembered that penguins like to toboggan whenever they get the chance. Perhaps he had been unwise to tie one end of the clothesline to his own wrist. At any rate, this time Mr. Popper found himself suddenly sliding on his own white-clad stomach down the 3 flights of steps. This delighted the penguin, who was enjoying his own slide just ahead of Mr. Popper. When they reached the bottom, Captain Cook was so eager to go up again that Mr. Popper had to call a taxi to distract him. "432 Proudfoot Avenue," said Mr. Popper to the driver. The driver, who was a kind and polite man, did not laugh at his oddly assorted passengers until he had been paid. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Popper when she opened the door to her husband. "You looked so neat and handsome this morning when you started out for your walk, and now look at the front of you." "I am so sorry, my love," said Mr. Popper in a humble tone, "but you can't always tell what a penguin will do next." So saying, he went to lie down, for he was quite exhausted from all the unusual exercise, while Captain Cook had a shower and took a nap in his icebox. All right, chapter 10, Shadows. Next day, the pictures of Mr. Popper and Captain Cook appeared in the Stillwater Morning Chronicle, with a photograph about the house painter who had received a penguin by air express from Admiral Drake in the faraway Antarctic. Then the Associated Press picked up the story, and a week later, the photograph in Rotten Grove, York, could be seen in the Sunday edition of the most important newspapers in all large cities in the country. Naturally, the Poppers all felt very proud and happy. Captain Cook was not so happy, however. He had suddenly ceased his happy exploring little walks about the house, and would sit most of the day sulking in the refrigerator. Mrs. Popper had removed all of the strange objects, leaving only the marbles and checkers, so that Captain Cook now had a nice, neat, orderly rookery. "He won't play with us any more," said Bill. "I tried to get some of my marbles from him, and he tried to bite me." "Naughty Captain Cook," said Janie. "Better leave him alone, children," said Mrs. Popper. "He feels mopey, I guess." But it was soon clear that it was something worse than mopiness that ailed Captain Cook. All day he would sit with his little white circled eyes staring out sadly from the refrigerator. His coat had lost its lovely glossy look. His round little stomach grew flatter every day. He would turn away when Mrs. Popper would offer him some canned shrimp. One evening she took his temperature. It was 104 degrees. "Well, Papa," she said, "I think you had better call the veterinary doctor. I'm afraid Captain Cook is really ill." But when the veterinary came, he only shook his head. He was a very good animal doctor, and though he had never taken care of a penguin before, he knew enough about birds to see at a glance that this was one seriously ill bird. "I will leave you with some pills. Give him one every hour. Then you can try feeding him on sorbet and wrapping him in ice packs. But I cannot give you any encouragement because I am afraid it is a hopeless case. This kind of bird was never made for this climate, you know. I can see that you have taken good care of him, but an Antarctic penguin can't thrive in still water." That night the Poppers sat up all night taking turns changing the ice packs. It was no use. In the morning Mrs. Popper took Captain Cook's temperature again. It had gone up to 105. Everyone was very sympathetic. The reporter from the Morning Chronicle stopped to inquire about the penguin. The neighbors brought in all sorts of broths and jellies to try to tempt the little fellow to eat. Even Mrs. Callahan, who had never had a high opinion of Captain Cook, made a lovely frozen custard for him. Nothing did any good. Captain Cook was too far gone. He slept all day now in a heavy stupor, and everyone was saying that the end was not far away. All the Poppers had grown terribly fond of the funny little solemn chap, and Mr. Popper's heart was frozen with terror. It seemed to him that his life would be very empty if Captain Cook went away. Surely somebody would know what to do for a sick penguin. He wished that there was some way of asking advice from Admiral Drake, away down in the South Pole, but there was no time. In his despair, Mr. Popper had an idea. A letter had brought him his pet. He sat down and wrote another letter. It was addressed to Dr. Smith, the curator of the great aquarium in Mammoth City, the largest in the world. Surely if anyone anywhere had any idea what could cure a dying penguin, it would this man would. 2 days later, there was an answer from the curator. "Unfortunately," he wrote, "it is not easy to cure a sick penguin. Perhaps you do not know that we, too, have in our aquarium at Mammoth City a penguin from the Antarctic. It is failing rapidly, in spite of everything we have done for it. I have wondered lately whether it is not suffering from loneliness. Perhaps that is what ails your Captain Cook. I am, therefore, shipping you under separate cover our penguin. You may keep her. There is just a chance that the birds may get on better together." And that is how Greta came to live at 432 Proudfoot Avenue. Okay, after chapter 10, this is what you're going to do. You have a paper that looks like it says news at the top and there's an empty box and lines. You're going to write an article about people in the town that saw Mr. Popper and reported what they did. Now, it talks about the men in the drugstore, and it talks about the barbershop guy, but it doesn't give us their names, and it doesn't tell us anybody else who ran into them. So I want you to create some names and people who live in this town who work in stores, and you're going to write an article about what they saw as Mr. Popper walked his penguin. And so I kind of said, there were some strange events today in Stillwater. Remember, Stillwater's where they're at, where Mr. Popper lives. Mr. Stubbs, the sanitation man, said he observed Mr. Popper walking down the street today holding a leash. On the end of the leash was the strangest sight, a hairless dog. Sorry, I have a hard time reading it. So in other words, you're just going to keep going on and tell us about it. I even had a little boy, little Tommy, who threw a temper tantrum because he told his mom he wanted a penguin for a pet and she said no.
So be creative, create your newspaper article, draw a picture of what they look like walking down the street, because remember the photographer took a picture of them together. And then as soon as you've done that, I'll show you where to glue it on your board.
Okay, you're going to glue it up in the top. Now notice I didn't glue it flat. I glued it so we could still lift it up and use that space for something else. I just kind of glued it up here at the top so that it's stuck, and then when it opens we can still use this underneath. So that's where you're going to put it, and this is what we've got done so far on our poster.